It's amazing. It's a great unlock, I think, with asking really focused and really original questions without having to resort to the stunt-like approach, which I see too many times, right? If you had a billboard, what would it say? These are fun trivia questions or lightning rounds, but they tip towards the cliche or the irrelevant. So what's your premise? What is your assertion you're making about your field? What should be? That's your belief system. Now press your curiosity through that, and whoever you talk to or whatever you create is meant to ask questions about that premise.
Hey, everyone. We're recording this fresh off a nice midsummer break. And my co-host today is Jay Acunzo. Jay and I always have the best conversations, and today is going to be no exception. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. So if you don't follow Jay and everywhere he is on the web, you really need to do that. And especially Instagram. Jay is one of those people that I admire so much. They can kind of make something out of nothing. They have a kernel, a little idea, and they spin it into a very interesting, entertaining lesson or story. And Jay actually, I don't know if you want to talk about this or not, but you actually took a break from Instagram for a while, and I reached out to him. I said, no, you're one of my favorites. I don't want you to leave. So today we're actually going to talk about one of his recent posts on Instagram, because Jay doesn't just share little snippets behind the scenes of his life. He also shares these little items of wisdom. And recently he shared this. I'm going to read it to you. And it just resonated with me and a lot of the things I talk about and write about, but it also was provocative. It was provocative. And I wanted to peel the onion and go a little deeper on some of these ideas today. So here's what Jay wrote. Creativity is not the constant manufacturing of brilliance. It's the consistent pursuit of curiosity. And when we're tired or stressed or we feel like an imposter, which is the subject of our last episode here on the Marketing Companion, we can regain momentum and ignite ideas by remembering this one idea. I don't need better ideas. I need to ask better questions. Don't be brilliant, be curious. So Jay, that was really well done. And I mean, I'm just such a big fan of yours and a big fan of these little things that you post on Instagram. I want to ask you some questions about it. But first, was there what prompted you to go down that rabbit hole? Was there some frustration going on, or was it a question from a colleague or customer?
Not one moment, but I think it's the overlap of two projects and honestly, that was born out of frustration, which I think is actually a nice precursor to curiosity. You see something you don't like and you're like, oh, and then you go, but why? And who else? And what if? And, from frustration, you get this nice little spark that helps you light the kindling of your curiosity. And then later you're like, I have a roaring fire of creativity. That's how I always think about my own process. It's like, I light the match. It's a feeling I have. It's mostly born out of frustration because we're all trying to be useful to our audiences, especially in our category of creation. We're not just doing something to, I don't know, because we need to get it out off of our chests all the time. Although I have projects where that's the case, we're trying to serve. So frustration leads to curiosity. Curiosity leads to creativity. And the places those two things were showing up. So I run a podcast now called How Stories Happen. Mark, we'll have to get you on the show at some point, maybe around the next book or something like that. But every episode, a creator or expert dissects a signature story piece by piece. So it's a look at the minutia of the craft of creating great stories. Because I don't believe you experience stories. You create them. You experience life, and then you put your butt in the chair, you do the work. So I have that going. And I'm always learning from these masterful communicators in the business world who aren't pointing to something incredibly grand they did and then documenting that and conveying it like a piece of their life's transcript. They're like, I went on a walk, I saw a thing, and now it's a signature story of mine or something like that. So I have that going on in my brain. And then I run this community group, this mastermind group called the Creator Kitchen, which is about the craft of creating higher impact, more differentiated content as professionals, the Creator Kitchen. And I noticed that a lot of our members are starting to pedestal some of their creative heroes way too much, where because it's so visible, like look how many followers, or like Mark or Jay or someone could say, let's have an AMA on LinkedIn or Threads or whatever. And like a bunch of people will ask them questions and you're sitting there going, I could never have made that video or given that speech or gotten people to respond to that prompt to ask me stuff. Like, so you start to see all these creative people like push their heroes further out of reach instead of be what I think a lot of creative people should be, which is the freaks who go, I'm going to make stuff like my heroes, right? And
Mm,
so all of these things rolled into me being like, wait a sec, we're losing sight of what creativity even is. It's not about doing something big. It,
yeah.
it unfolds in the minutia. It unfolds in these tiny little things that we can all do and try. And it starts with just asking the next question, right? You're not sure what to write. Well, what are you interested in? What are you curious about? What are you frustrated by? I watched John Mulaney recently on a Netflix special talk to David Letterman about developing an idea Letterman had, a premise he had for a joke, and Letterman couldn't quite figure it out. And Mulaney was like, oh, well, if that's your premise, if that's the statement of fact or the observation you made, then here's the next question you ask. And that leads to this question and this question. And what do comedians do if not constantly aerate their material through curiosity, right? The Jerry Seinfeld book, Is This Anything? So that's a lot, Mark. But all those things kind of rolled up to me being like, wait, can we reclaim this idea of creativity for what it actually is? It's not the constant manufacturing of brilliance, it's the consistent pursuit of curiosity.
Yeah. So let's unpack this a little bit. So there were two aspects of this that resonated with me. Number one is one of the most powerful lessons I've learned in my career, something that I've repeated in a few of my talks and at least one of my books, is a lesson I learned uh, when I got to sit at the feet of Peter Drucker for a few years when I was in graduate school. And he would get really, really frustrated at all these, brilliant executives in his class trying to solve these difficult marketing problems and come up with all the answers. And he would emphasize that he said to be a great leader, you can't have all the right answers, but you need to have the right questions. So, that's always at the forefront of my mind. And that really informed how I approach marketing and how I approach consulting in a huge way. But here's the other thing that I'd like to talk to you about. I think the two greatest soft skills for a marketer are empathy and curiosity. And I wonder, can curiosity be learned? Empathy, I think you can have things happen in your life. I can point to things that happened in my life that definitely made me more empathetic. When I was young, I remember I had this episode where I was quick to judge people. I had this episode where I met this guy and he didn't seem like a very educated guy. And he was always using poor grammar. And I sort of judged him for that. And then when I learned about his background, he said, like, when he was a kid, he went to 16 different elementary schools. His family was so poor, they would just move from place to place. And I thought, oh my gosh, what a life this guy lives. Who am I to judge him? And he was a great man. He was a great father. He was a hard worker. And like experiences like that helped me to be more empathetic. Curiosity, though, is a harder one. What do you think? Can you learn to be more curious? And I know there's lots
Hmm.
of little short-term little tips and tricks, but I mean, really, to rewire your brain to be curious, can it be done?
Mm. Something I've become fascinated by is there's so many things that we're asking today, like creating content on the internet, that are downstream from more upstream problems that we ought to be addressing, right? And then the downstream thing takes care of itself, or at least becomes clear. Like a simple example is, what's my strategy on LinkedIn? What's an effective LinkedIn strategy, right? Like that's a question you might hear. Well, very upstream from that is like, well, what's your business? What's your business model? What's your message? Or is it different? Like, no amount of like a strategic, a great, well ironed out strategy on LinkedIn isn't going to make up for the fact that like you're not saying anything in general across your platform that people remember, right? So that's an upstream problem. Is like, let's say something that matters or differentiate your message first, then talk to me about social media. So in this case, I think what we're talking about is slightly downstream, like being more curious from some upstream things that we ought to address to unlock, not necessarily become more curious like we've learned the skill, but like unlock the nascent curiosity that we all possess within us, right? So an example of that is, do you have a consistent creative practice? Like I have written on the internet at least once a week, an article a week since 2005. And the vast majority of that stuff nobody should read. And in fact, nobody has. It's fine. But that's not the point. The point is to persist, to improve, to
Yeah,
write your way there, right? I
yeah,
mentioned comedians before.
yeah,
They
yeah,
go to small comedy clubs where the goal is to actively work through junk
yeah,
and get better. And because they're getting a feedback loop in their own brains because they're forced to communicate things. And also with the audience in a small sense, in a comedy club sense, which I think, by the way, is a great use of social media or conversations with friends. So upstream of your curiosity is, do you have a creative practice that's going to ignite your curiosity because you're forcing yourself to ship on a deadline no matter how you feel, and you're forcing yourself to observe the world and ask questions, or even just in the moment go, what do I want to say or write about today?
mhm,
So
mhm.
I think there's stuff we can do, practice included, like having a creative practice that unlocks the nascent curiosity within you, and that's worked for me. I have 3 or 4 projects at all times, but there's always at least one of those. And I would say right now it's my newsletter, where I would basically write that to nobody, and I'm going to ship it on schedule unless I'm taking a vacation for my own sanity, no matter what, no matter how good or bad I feel it is. That's the sort of curiosity igniter for me, is I have a creative practice.
Yeah, while you're speaking there, I've been frantically trying to find a quote, and I found it. And this is from the great storyteller and podcaster Ira Glass. He said, the key thing, I think, is to just force yourself through the work, to put yourself in a position where you have to turn out product that forces the skills to come. I don't know. It would be interesting. Maybe I'll go a little deeper on the research on this, because I've met people in my life who are profoundly non-curious. It would be interesting to see if they put themselves into a practice where they made a commitment to put out the work, if it would force the skills to come. The other thing I've been thinking about is, you and I share a common passion. If there's a word beyond passion, it's probably what you and I share around this idea of of I mean, just don't accept boring. Just don't accept it.
Yes.
Um, and this is something I've been studying a lot. It's going to be uh, really the primary subject of a new book that I'm working on. And one of the things that I'm learning is that there's an infrastructure in our world that really rewards dull. So you think about, what do we try to do a lot with our content? We want our content to be found, to be discovered, maybe if we're lucky, even to go viral for a few moments. Well, what's the prerequisite to that? You've got to conform to Google's algorithms. You've got to get traffic. So that puts you in this box where you have to work certain ways. There you go a step further, and you think about performance marketing. And we've been on this treadmill for 25 years now, where we're looking at Facebook algorithms, and now TikTok algorithms, and we're putting ourselves in this cage to succeed in this outside world. It might have to be dull. And then there's also this idea, if you're working for a company, stepping out of the box and really doing something rather audacious could mean, it could mean your job. It could mean a slap on the hands from the legal department. So there's like this scaffolding. There's a scaffolding in our world holding dull in place.
I'm not sure I
And
see it the same
no, you
way.
probably wouldn't. You probably wouldn't. But go ahead and comment on that.
Yeah, well, what made me think about is like, so I mentioned the show I run, How Stories Happen. One of the things I'm doing now is working with a production company. For many years, I would do it myself or work with a freelancer. So I'm working with this firm called Share Your Genius, and they have a dedicated like guest booker, someone who's helping me with all the workflow involved in reaching out to and booking guests. And so let's say that person decided to do, there's the optical or sort of like marketing cliche version of doing something different or audacious or innovative. And then there's what I would say actually qualifies as that. The cliche or stereotypical thing would be like, I'm going to send them some kind of like package in the mail and they open it and something leaps out, right? Like that kind of thing, right? Where it's like, I don't know if that's what we're going for. To
Yeah.
innovate in that guest booker role might include that, maybe, right? There's too many variables at play here that we have to figure out first to land on that tactic. But I think almost universally, those people, those individuals in that space where they might be rewarded for boring because it's about efficiency and professionalism and repeatability. One of the things I told the person who's assigned to my show is when we're booking guests, we are going to anticipate the guests' needs and questions before they have to come to us with them. So an example of that is like most people, and I know this as a frequent guest on podcasts, in their calendar invites, they give you the link to the show, maybe a little detail about what the show is or links to their personal site or something. You know what they don't often mention? Is this audio or audio and video? Please tell me. I just now accept that it's probably both, but I'm doing that because they are not anticipating my needs, right? Another example is on my show, I have to get not just a time to talk to the guest, but also a signature story, like maybe it's from their book or recent newsletter edition that we have to dissect. So there's 2 homework assignments on the part of the guest. That's high friction. So I've come up with ways to anticipate maybe they're busy. Maybe they don't know what I mean by signature story, right? So here's some language, here's some examples. And then there's an out at the very end of that stuff, which is like, listen, you can also just send me the project of note, like a book or newsletter or show, whatever has your heart right now. And I will find a story to tell you, right? That's anticipating their needs. So it looks, I guess, kind of boring, but to the person on the receiving end, that is profoundly delightful because you look at their status quo, compare it to what we are doing in the guest booking process, and they're like, this is amazing. This is incredible. But you know who's not going to write about that? Friggin' Adweek, right? It's not going to win an award at Cannes and all this stuff that marketers go, oh, that's innovative and creative. No, it's not. Right? To pursue curiosity and be creative in this guest booker's world is to go, what is that person wondering? How do I make this easier on them? That's creativity.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, one of the things that it's really utterly depressing to me is how boring most marketing is. And there's even like research now that shows they've done tests on marketing messages and advertising, and I mean, most people have like no emotional response whatsoever to most of the marketing and advertising out there. It's even worse for B2B. And I think the thing that's different about you and me in some cases is we're accountable for no one, really. I mean, maybe we want to delight our audience, but to me, that kind of pushes me to be a little crazier, to take
Isn't
more.
that wild? Isn't that because if we fail, we don't eat. If a big brand fails or misses, quota or whatever by 5%, they're panicking like it's the end of the world. And guess what happens? The next quarter starts, right? They're fine. But the panic, the stress, it's all about operating like from a place of, I just don't want to get fired. I could rant the live long day about this. This is a big reason why big brands used to be my clientele and they no longer are, because everything I'm doing is about being proactive and not reactive. Like I do think we have to just sort of embrace it. Like there's a whole slew of marketing thinkers, executives, teams, etc., that maybe are a lost cause, Mark. Like, this is a very cynical take coming from a very warm and fuzzy person, but I don't see any merit anymore in trying to convince people who have had all these years on the internet of watching amazing artists and creators get all the passionate fans that brands want to then go back to your 12 agencies and innovate 1 or 2% and then complain about it. I'm not saying you're doing it wrong. You are in that world. That is necessary, perhaps, but just stop complaining that you're not creative and recognize you run in a behemoth organization. You're just going to turn the crank a little bit faster than the guy that came before you. That's the job. Like, let's stop pretending that real innovation comes out of massive organizations, please.
Yeah, but yeah, unfortunately, I mean, the issue for me and you and every brand is the same, and that is awareness. It's like standing up, standing out above this wall of noise in our world, and it's going to become even worse when we have this pandemic of dullness created by AI.
Yeah. Oh God, yes.
So I mean, it's like, and I see this even in others, especially in the social media space, where it's almost cultural, where they just kind of copy each other and tweak each other a little bit. But
Yeah.
let me mention our sponsor here, and it's so great because Brevo has been sponsoring the show for a long time now, and they've just signed up for another year, so I'm very grateful for that. And Brevo is a really cool alternative to HubSpot, for example. It's perfect for business growth for SMBs, sales teams looking to build with a consolidated marketing and CRM toolbox. Many Marketing Companion listeners have tried it and fallen in love with it. It's something I use. It's just so easy. I'm not a techie person. I am not a patient person who tries to figure out tech. So go to brevo.com. Brevo is brevo.com/marketing companion. Try this for free. Got nothing to lose. And if you do decide to sign up, use the code companion to get 50% off. Jay, another thing that you mentioned in your Instagram post that I wanted to explore. You say, look, ask better questions. What makes a question better?
That is fascinating. So I think there's two ways to look at this.
Maybe I.
That's a great question. That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people who are asking questions that feel like a procedural of questions. A podcast is an easy example. You listen to most podcasts about the business world or marketing or B2B, and they're asking questions where I can sense that the guest has answered that same question 1,000 times before, or that the host could almost write a post as if being the guest, like, I'm interviewing Mark Schaefer today, and here's my first question. And I, as the host, could write an article that more or less is my guess at what Mark would say, and I would be 80% of the way there. Because they're not asking questions that they genuinely want to know the answers to. They're asking questions to try and engineer some kind of outcome, whether that's you think highly of me now because I asked that question, or I need to rank on search, or this is a question one is supposed to ask a person like Mark Schaefer, whatever. So I think it first starts, and this is a hallmark of great storytellers. You like to think about storytelling as, a way to connect with people around not just what happened, but how it made you feel. Great storytellers, they go inward deeper to connect externally deeper too. It's a paradox of storytelling. So they get more honest with themselves about how something made them feel or about how they see the world than others are likely to do. It's the same with asking questions, right? That's why curiosity is related to all things creativity, not just telling stories or interviewing people. Can you actually identify a question that you're almost scared to ask, where you're like, I really want to know the answer, but I have no idea what Mark is going to say, which is what you just did to me. And why did you do that? Because you are practiced and because I think we have shared trust with each other. And that's maybe a little bit more difficult when you're talking to a client or a boss or a guest on your show, and maybe you don't know them that well, or they're a fancy name or what have you. So I think to ask a better question is to turn more deeply inward and go, what am I actually frustrated about? What am I actually curious about? And can I ask a question that, I almost feel a little exposed answering this, because it's not like I'm putting the ball on the tee and just letting them swing through it. It's a difficult pitch to hit, but if they hit it, something magic might happen.
So how would you foster this in an organization? One of the conversations that I loved that we had several months ago, where you threw out this challenge that maybe organizations should think about creating creators. I'm just like sort of mesmerized by that idea. I just love that idea. I think there's a lot of power in that. So
Yeah.
how do you roll some of the things we've talked about today in terms of, how do you instill curiosity in an organization? How do you reward curiosity on a team?
Yep. The upstream problem at play again, right? So taking either your overall brand and the message that you're putting out into the market overall, or a specific project. We can keep going with a podcast because here we are. But these things should carry some kind of premise. Like the comedian has a premise for the joke. It's an assertion you make from which everything follows. So if I say to the world, this is my platform's premise, I think you should care more about resonance than reach to grow your business. And you can debate me on that. It's a defensible assertion that I'm making that's pulled from my perspective. If that was the only thing I knew, and then I show up to interview somebody, or I have to brainstorm ideas for content. In other words, both of those things have curiosity baked in, right? Now, what am I curious about? Not in general, Mark Schaefer, not in general, the industry I'm in, but that specific premise. What is the logical next question that follows? Oh, well, what is resonance anyway? What is reach anyway? Why is it problematic to over index or over obsess with this idea of reach? What damage is that doing? Who is doing it better? Who is really investing in ideas like community or storytelling or craft, all these things that go deeper instead of broader, right? All these questions cascade off of the back of or downstream from this upstream thing, which is I have a distinct premise. So if an organization has that distinct position in the market, or a project has that specific angle or bent or theme to it, now what you're doing is you're pressing your observations and questions through that lens. And it's a lot easier to come up with really, really good questions. And people might go, wow, how did you come up? I've never heard Mark interviewed that way. It's like, yeah, because I'm not interviewing Mark. I'm asking Mark to help me understand something specific about my premise. Like I'm enrolling Mark in a journey that I'm on as an organization, as a host, as a writer, whatever. And so I'm using this premise almost as like an alignment function or forcing function to stay aligned with my questions. It's amazing. It's a great unlock, I think, with asking really focused and really original questions without having to resort to the stunt-like approach, which I see too many times, right? If you had a billboard, what would it say? These are fun trivia questions or lightning rounds, but they tip towards the cliche or the irrelevant. So what's your premise? What is your assertion you're making about your field? What should be? That's your belief system. Now press your curiosity through that, and whoever you talk to or whatever you create is meant to ask questions about that premise.
Yeah, and I do agree with you with about resonance. You suggested maybe I wouldn't agree with you, but I had this
Okay.
like really powerful light bulb one time where I was hired by a big consulting company in Seattle. And so before my workshop, I had dinner with the guy that hired me, and I was like, how in the world did they find me? I mean, if you did a search for, like, I think it was personal branding. I think we did the workshop on personal branding. If you did a Google search in Seattle for someone who could help you with personal branding, there is no way they're going to find me. He said, well, I read your content and it resonates with me. And that's why you're here, because I believe in your message. So yeah, I'm a big fan of resonance, and I'm a big fan of everyone listening today. I so appreciate you being part of the Marketing Companion audience now in our 12th year. Thank you for being here. We never take you for granted, and we will see you next time.